Here's the final part of our conversation with Republican gubernatorial candidate Chad Prather, in which I asked him about his plans for the border and our state's power grid.
We have border towns that are used to seeing influx of migrants and then declines at the border and dealing with that kind of life.
Yeah.
We haven't seen anything like this in a long, long time. Mm-hmm. What would you do to keep those communities safe and help the people wanting asylum here? And obviously you could deal with Washington because ultimately it is still the international border and the White House plays a big role.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack there. One of the things that I like to say is there's no politically correct solution to a complex problem. And at some point in time, we're going to have to be politically incorrect in a lot of ways. We saw what happened in the last couple days with the election in McAllen, Texas. You have a city that is 85% Hispanic in its population and demographic. They elected a conservative Republican as mayor. Congratulations to them, by the way. It's a real problem, contrary to what Washington, D.C. says, because they want to say there's no problem here. We all know there's a problem here when it comes to immigration. There needs to be an easier path to immigration. Let me say that. There's really good people who are coming to the border. There's really good reasons for them to be coming, but there's also a lot that's going on that is nefarious and wrong. We've got to get to a point where we pressure Washington, D.C. to make the cartels an international terrorist organization. That shuts down a lot of different avenues whereby they're operating. We need to bring the National Guard down here, leave enough in Washington, D.C. to push papers around and do administrative work. We have to have a show of force. We've got to unleash and support our Border Patrol and ICE agents. Now, this is on the federal level, but we can do a lot to leverage ourselves as Texas. We're a huge state. We've got to let them do their jobs again. We've got to untie their hands. So I always say we've got to detect, we've got to deter, we've got to detain, we've got to deport, we've got to defend. That's a lot to unpack in that. There's a lot there because at the end of the day, this is a humanitarian crisis. There's a lot of human lives that are at stake. We need to be compassionate, but we also need to be forceful. There's no question we're under attack by the cartels. There are those who want to bring in a lot of influences here that are not going to be good for the future. And if we continue to let this happen, it's going to be untenable for the next generation of Texans. I do believe we need a wall. I believe that we need as many barriers as possible so that we can regulate who is coming into our state. I still plead the 10th Amendment on these things and say that we have responsibility to guard our borders. We also, we can determine who comes into this state. The federal government can determine who's naturalized in the United States, but we can determine who comes into this state. And I'm starting to see too little too late on behalf of Governor Abbott in the rhetoric that he's saying these days.
And then when it comes to our grid, we had that huge freeze in February.
Yeah.
Killed hundreds of people. We never know how many. Millions without power, some still without power because of water issues. What do you believe can be done, should be done to ensure that we don't have that kind of blackout again?
Yeah. There's a couple of things. One, when 25% of our power in this state is coming from, quote, green energy, we've got to stop being politically correct there, and we're going to have to do the things that are tried and true and things we know. Oil and gas is king here in the state of Texas. We've got to stop apologizing for that. We've got to rely on that power and also that industry that employs so many people here in this state. Another thing is nuclear. Another thing is hydrogen. We can look at those things as clean forms of energy, but we have made a bad guy out of coal. The whole situation there, if we had these coal plants, rather than shutting them down, if we'd have had those fired up to the ability when we saw this coming and the ERCOT shutdown was about to happen, and we knew that this 100-year storm was going to hit us, you turn the knob and you let the power come back on. It doesn't mean you have to keep it on forever, but you turn the knob and you bring it back on. But instead, we've embraced the woke agenda of clean, green energy. These windmills out there that consume 35% of their own power that they produce. It's not an efficient means by which we, I liken it to electric cars. You know, Joe Biden wants us all in electric cars. You can charge an electric car up one time. It can't make it all the way across the state of Texas. That's the same with a lot of these green energy initiatives. They're just not enough to handle what we need as consumers here in this great state.